All right. Welcome back for those of you who may have missed it. First of all, my sincere apologies. I did send out an event invite and had to cancel it, but we're back on. Hopefully, I did repost on LinkedIn, so hopefully some people have caught on. This is live with Martin Foster from Teamform, and we're all going to talk about Agile Frameworks. So welcome, Martin.
Thank you. Thanks, Marcus, and apologies for not clicking on the first link fast enough. So
It's all
we
good.
live and
It
learn.
happens. So before we start, let me just do a quick intro for you, Martin. Now, my guest today is a principal consultant. He's all about agile team-centric ways of working, and he's been involved with developing and implementing agile transformation strategies with a variety of clients out of Australia. It's all about enhancing operational agility and productivity. As well, he has been the co-host of Melbourne Business Agility Meetup. And some of you may or may not have heard about business agility, so we'll talk a bit about that. And he's also been the co-author of the Business Agility Report. I also have to include that he's been a cloud product architect, a practice manager, as well as a systems engineer. So he knows his stuff. He's got lots of years of experience. Welcome all the way from Melbourne, Australia, Martin Foster. Welcome to the
Thanks,
show, Martin.
Marcus. Yeah, what a journey. It's interesting when people like resume your life, and it's like, yeah, it's come a long ways in the past 20 years,
It's come, yeah,
including moving from Canada to Australia. So there we go. Life.
no doubt. And I actually was looking at your LinkedIn profile. It turns out we went to McMaster University around exactly the same time. You came in about a year after I was there, and you left maybe a year or two after I did. So our
Good old
paths did not
Hamilton.
cross, but we were in the same city at the same university at the same time.
Fantastic. It's neat to
Yeah,
find all that stuff. So,
yeah.
business
It's all good.
agility, right? Here we
It's all
go.
about business.
Yeah,
It's all about business agility. I got a few questions to ask you. We'll try and run through this as quickly as we can, maybe about half an hour or so for those of you who are live. By the way, I just want to mention that feel free to add in your comments. I know it's a different league, so maybe not many people will show up, but that's okay. We'll still chit chat nonetheless. So let's start off, Martin. You've had a lot of experience in business agility practices. Let's start off with what practical steps can large organizations take to implement business agility practices or even to benefit from it?
fantastic. So, like, I think before going a little bit into the answer is like, well, what is this guy doing here telling you to do something, right? So, what this comes from is over the past 6 years now, I had this exact question was forming a lot of the basis of my work. Like, we were working with bigger orgs. They're like, something is not quite right or not where we want it to be when we're trying to deliver a product to market, or one of the first organizations I worked with was sort of facing this existential threat, and the market as they were seeing it was being changed by the government. It's like, okay, so how can we adapt to this when we're used to being an incumbent? Um, we had initially focused a lot on the way like teams get their work done. So bringing in 500 people to mostly develop a technology solution and then growing a program from there to be more customer centric. Um, but and this is where like there's been a lot of information and practices over in the software technical development field. But we were finding ourselves working with like the rest of the organization, if you will. So a lot of like agility focus had historically, maybe still is, quite focused on technology. But like the whole organization makes you work, right? So if you're in a regulated industry, you probably need to talk to lawyers. If you've got a product, you want to get it onto market, you're going to involve sales, you're going to involve marketing. So how do we make that whole system work around? And like, what are the best practices for it? Which is when I ran into Emma Leyburn and the people behind the Business Agility Institute, which were very much trying to look further into like how do we make a whole organization respond to change faster, just make it more nimble. A lot of like big capital A Agile has potentially gotten a bad name in the past 10 years. Wherever you are on that matrix, it doesn't really matter. It's much more like, do you want your organization to be more adaptable and flexible? So I got involved a bit with that because the Business Agility Institute was proposing to do what the DevOps Research Association had done for like their like DevOps agility or like global surveys. They later on wrote a book called Accelerate that was very much focused on like software practices and what distinguishes high performers from low performers. But a lot of that was also about just being more nimble and having a better work environment. Yeah, so the first business agility report was published in 2018, and it's been published every year since. And so a lot of like what we're going to talk about today is anchored on my work there, crossed over with a little bit of like, I guess, what I'm observing day to day as a consultant working in larger firms that are keeping on trying to do this and keeping on achieving, but like the nature of the work, the nature of the competitive environment keeps on changing. So there is a lot here to do with like how we bring people together in the best possible way to get things done. So
I was going to say before you go on, I was going to say this is crucial because as a business analyst, sometimes we have these blinders on. It's just go and do this one work, but we really have to understand how the entire organization works. The more nimble we are, like you say, the more able we are able, the more facilitated we can be to bring about change much more easily, much more efficiently. So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, so like your question is like what practical steps can large organizations to take to implement and benefit business agility practices, right?
Right.
I think the number one thing is if you're trying, like normally this means a significant change in behavior, like, and people model behavior typically from what they see from the leadership team. I think we've all been in large organizations that have giant posters on the wall of like, here's our visions and values and whatnot. And that's fantastic. But we will all intrinsically follow what we actually see people do and what we model our leaders do. So if the poster on the wall says one thing, but then the behavior says something else, then that's going to be the biggest challenge to altering how your organization works. And going back to the survey, we asked people, what is the number one challenge you find? And at the top, one of the top two year on year, ever since inception of this thing, it has been like the way that leaders show up and model their work. So the difference between a really high performing organization is that the CEO, the board, the like executive leadership team gets this, recognizes it's going to be a change in their behavior, and really, really models it. And when it works, it's like when people really bring this onto themselves, it's amazing, right? It's like, I'm giving you permission to not fully box in a deliverable on time, money, outcome, stopping. And we're going to go in there and we're going to be a little bit more nimble about it and like apply an iterative learning style approach to this while still bringing out or attempting to bring out deliverables to market and to customers, just potentially in smaller tranches or what have you. So very much having that top level leaders modeling their behavior. And if you're going to change a much larger organization, like ones that have like quite different business units, we frequently see like technology is sort of like a capability that's 25 to 50% of the staff. Then you'll have like different business units driven by like market segment or something like that. So like trying to typically I see a lot of like agility transformation style attempts being purely focused on technology, but we've also learned quite well that the ones that succeed better do involve more of the organization. And I've seen this very much firsthand. Like you can make the technology and work really on the technology part and make it spin really, really efficiently. And it slams into the boundaries of the rest of the organization because they've got a different way of working. And like, whoa, slow down. I've got an engagement front door. And to get your product to market, you're on queue number 10. Maybe we'll get you in 6 months' time. And that's not like making one part faster. It just means you slam into another constraint somewhere. And I've heard a few people talk about like theory of agile constraints. You can speed up one part, but you'll just slam into the next most constrained element. So yeah, in summary to your question, the sponsorship from above and really looking at like what is the flow of work, the value stream across different parts of the organization, and including all those parts into the change you're making. So maybe like cut horizontally instead of vertically, if that makes sense.
That's amazing. So it's all about leadership. It all starts from the top and it trickles down.
Yeah.
You've got this organization, obviously, that's high performing. Now, what are your key predictive indicators for trying to identify those high performing organizations?
Fantastic. So something we really want, and this is something, again, we're a little bit copying or getting inspired by what the technology field did is like we're looking at in the survey that backs the report for like 6 years now, what has been the common trend, right? So the model we work or uses different domains of business agility. It breaks down to several parts. The Business Agility Institute website, which I think we probably can share a link or something, can talk to the model. But the idea is there's lots of different facets of this, and we wanted to know, is there something that the high performers do, that's focused? Like, is there a few of these areas that just have like outsized benefits? And if I've worked on improving that, like I could potentially see a better payoff than like looking at other elements. And the answer is yes. So we've seen for like 5 years' time that there's a few different frames that work well, or like, I guess, facets of business agility. And the number one thing that comes up is being able to have a more adaptive funding model. So if you're in a place where budgets are like issued on a yearly basis, and there's probably like a 12-month run up to that for like getting budget for the next year, you've sort of like immediately implemented a cycle that's quite like it's quite high friction. You've got to come in year one to make the case for the money that you'll get year two, so that you can do something that maybe at best you can deliver, at the start of year three. And that's like a really, really long cycle. We talk about it that way, it kind of makes intuitive sense. And what nobody's saying here is don't have budgets. Like we like money is a real thing. It's a finite constraint, but it's more think of you're going to potentially set a spend envelope. There's going to be a few directives aligned. Like a few ideas that are aligned to the strategy, a few bets for like future horizons. Keep the ability to, or I guess the big ask of organizations is building in that ability to be able to redirect funds to a different bet, which is really easy to say, a lot harder to do, and it requires a lot of collaboration, like with your finance partners. But I've found that being able to explain and talk through this link makes a very big change, right? Like, what are you trying to accomplish here is generally the nice big question, bringing people into the tent, into the change, saying, look, we can't see the future. We know we're going to have to react. We don't want to start a whole new funding cycle. The only ask is saying, like, instead of spending on A, we want the ability to reroute it to B, because you have finite money, finite people. So that's number one. Then we've seen like the other two that we've seen has changed a little bit over the past few years, but it's basically along that ability to like change that strategy to go with, right? So if you want to be able to change your funding, why? Well, it's because you sense a new opportunity or a new threat on the market. So being able to adapt strategies seamlessly, and then like has been the second biggest thing we've seen, which is tied in a little bit with a concept of like being able to relentlessly improve, right? Like, how can you adapt a strategy if your way of working isn't always looking, like in a shorter cycle of like, we're going to have a hypothesis for something, we're going to try it, we're going to get it out in the market, we're going to measure how it goes, and then have like this retrospective or shorter improvement cycle loop where we go, what's the next improvement that we're going to bring onto it? Adapting strategies seamlessly and being able to relentlessly improve really well stuck together with that. So it's not really changing, the sequence of work. You can even do this inside, Gantt chart driven projects. It's more at each step when we get something done, let's have a look and decide if an adjustment is necessary, as opposed to following down like a more inflexible path. Last but not least, we want that ability to sense and respond, right? So there's a lot of this on like the data-driven element of the world, or fact, being informed by facts. Whenever you find these facts, like, if you're going to do something, and you're delivering a service to a customer, what's your feedback loop on that, right? Like, have you done the thing that's moving the needle as you expected? If we're going to change the organization, work on employee experience or something, how am I going to be able to pick up and get as much early notice as possible about the shift that this is making? So there's a lot in measurement, particularly, as we have a lot more digital technologies right now, things that in the past were guesses, we can be a lot more informed. So those three things, being able to adapt funding, funding work dynamically, adapting strategies more seamlessly, being able to change direction, and really having that sort of like early as possible leading indicator to be able to respond to it.
So we've got these indicators, we've got obviously ways of working, we've got leadership. It's all about trickle down, but something can happen just like that. For example, unpredictably, like COVID. And
Yeah.
we went through COVID for 2, 3 years, 4 years for some countries. What are the key lessons that we've learned from COVID regarding ways of working, like how to prioritize ways of working?
That's a really good question. I like this. Like this is sort of like I guess an accidental behavior of when we were building the 2020 business agility report and just looking at the survey responses, before March and after March. Like it is just crazy how different things were. Um, and the big takeaway from it is we had frequently heard, hey, it's not possible to do what I just discussed, right? Like we can't change our funding. We can't reroute the resources of the organization down some other path. Actually, just about every organization, like particularly a private company that was being kept afloat by somebody else that survived the pandemic was able to oh, something big has changed here. And people were able to exercise this muscle maybe for the first time to really route, like say, okay, it's really important that we be able to move our staff, to work from home. But while still being able to service customers. How are we going to do that? We have 1 week, 2 weeks, being able to focus an entire organization on one, massive existential crisis actually demonstrates that you can keep on doing this. And it's the hardest thing is saying, actually, I have one big organizational goal here, not 20, 30, 50, top big strategic outcomes for the year. When there's too many, it really diverts attraction,
Mm.
or diverts attention. And what we're trying to do and prove that we're able to learn and all exercise in recent memory during the pandemic was that finding one or two key focus areas, really routing, doubling down on that, getting it done and getting that benefit or that capability out is much more important than confusing the message with a lot more objectives that eventually you just get behind something you can hide on, and that's not a good outcome for organizations.
Yeah, so that's perfect. Yeah, it's amazing how this all falls down into something like disaster recovery, for example. If you have a really good disaster recovery in place, then when something like COVID does happen, you know exactly how to act.
Yeah.
Let's talk. Sorry, you were going to say? Go ahead.
No, I said, yeah,
Yeah.
the disaster recovery has a lot to do with preparedness and being aware of what you could do. It's a bit of scenario modeling and planning, and a lot of that is transposable to organizations. But what we saw during COVID, it was like a force function of yeah, we've talked about this before, but now we really have to
No,
just act in the next 24 hours. Yeah.
yeah, no, true, true. Let's sort of steer the conversation toward organizational structure, at least performance of an organization. So how you've got this efficient organization, you know how to detect it or you built it up. Now, how can they contribute to better performance, to faster market responses?
Yeah. Um, so going back to the business agility report again, um, in the pretty high up on the challenges list, between item 3 and 6 out of the top 10 for the past few years, there's been a big pickup on inefficient, or unsuitable organizational structures, and this connects a lot to my day-to-day work. So if I've got, I guess, an organization that's nicely set up from a managerial standpoint. I've got my technology function, maybe my small medium enterprise market segment, and my large enterprise sales and market segment over here. It's quite well structured in terms of everyone sort of knows the role and job they want to do. But what we find is when we're trying to get a product or service out to our actual customers, is actually quite cross-cutting through there. I'm going to need an element of technology. I'm going to need a version of that product that's targeted to the small medium enterprise. A version of that same service will be targeted to larger enterprises, but will have to be structured and operate differently because it's a different offering. And then I'll have the rest of the go-to-market, marketing, sales sort of engines stuck around there somehow. If I have to bounce work between these divisions or divisional silos, it's going to be a lot slower. There's going to be a lot more handoffs. And the ask and the trend that we're seeing on the market right now is, what is that value stream that cuts through that? And this has a lot to do with getting started also, is instead of changing the whole organization, pick a value stream against a product or service your organization does, and then build teams cross-functionally across that. That is like super easy to say, but it actually means a very big shift. It means that individuals might be working in teams that don't relate to, I guess, the reporting lines anymore. You can almost see it as like how a typical project had been set up in the past, to have a project manager set up to do something, and we go like, source the people we needed from across the organization. What we're saying is or noticing is that like that project spin up time is not super efficient, particularly for services that we want to keep on going. So don't really intend to stop this project. It's reporting, like there's a product behind it. It's intended to keep on being run. So we want to set up a teaming structure, and usually several teams who are going to work together collaboratively, but be able to cut across the organization. So yeah, the ability to be able to build teams, that are sort of aligned to a value stream. So you still need several teams packing together. There's a term we tend to use for this, is like a team of teams. Like I've got a lot of teams, and together they're responsible for a service. This whole organization, will be kind of like virtually sliced. It will come from different elements of the silos we just discussed. And the ability to do this is like one of those big organizational structural elements that'll have an outsized impact on performance, because what we're able to do is reduce the handoffs from one spot to another. Or another way to talk about it is, if I look at individual teams or people that report to one line, you can locally optimize for yourself. You can say, hey, there's chaos going on around me. I'm going to have engagement front doors, and that's going to control the work that comes in, so that the work coming in for the team is nice and sane, and we can parse it, like from the first thing in to the last thing out, or maybe with a bit of prioritization. But a lot of that sort of behavior means that when you step back and look at the entire organization, everybody has segmented work into little queues, and the path from getting an idea or in someone's mind saying, hey, we should respond to a market opportunity here, to a benefit that's out to customers and measurable, has to go through all these little queues. And we've noticed that over and over, being able to structure people into teams with less queuing, a lot more collaborative view on the overall outcomes of work, and splitting that through is a much more efficient and nimble way of getting the benefit out to customer. And then ability means a lot less time is spent from start to end, so your lead time is dropped. And that means you can also observe and get these feedback loops going a lot faster. So yeah, structurally being able to look to see what's the value stream, what's the product, what's the service that I'm offering, and structuring your people against that, even if that means you don't have to change reporting lines for this, but it means you've got to find a way to build and set up cross-functional teams and understand the difference between them. Take care of individuals with your line management hierarchy in their careers, but also look at the work from that more enterprise standpoint.
I like this idea. So you've got these cross-functional teams, obviously are very efficient, less siloed. It's all about efficient value streams. And this brings me to this big question. Someone might say, oh, now that I move into this project, does my title change? So why is there an increasing demand for professionals with this dual skill? For example, BA and a product manager, or a BA and a product owner. How can this really benefit an organization, or does it?
Yeah. So this is where we're taking the conversation now, and what we've been talking about so far is what's the big organizational structure changes, right? What does this mean for I guess the hive, everyone? And now we're switching this across to what does it mean for you and me as practitioners, right? I'm a person, I'm looking to do interesting and stimulating work. How do I fit and be well positioned to work in these more nimble ways of working and altering structures? This conversation, this topic of there's an accelerating pace of change since forever. I was reading a book from the 70s, and it's the rate of change in business is changing faster than ever before. And I think ever since that was written, it's even more true today. So as individuals, what does this mean for us? So I think there's two parts to this, because you mentioned something a little bit earlier about the context. It is, I really want to challenge everyone that's listening that the understanding the context of the work is super duper important, right? this work that I'm doing, how does that connect back to the product or service that's ultimately paying the bill, right? Like, so who is my end customer? Not the next team, down the road that I'm working with to get a part of this equation done, but how does it translate all the way through to the thing that my company sells or my organization delivers to citizens or something like that, that ultimately unlocks the budget, the funding that like pays for this whole sequence behind me, including myself. Being quite aware of that context, I think, is a big shift for a lot of individuals. But it's also the thing that will empower you to understand, right? If I've got to choose between two items, two things I could do today, right? Understanding the benefit you're delivering and the customer at the end of the line will probably help you choose as to which one has highest value. Now, the other flip of this is like, as a career, what does this mean for like what we're being asked to do as individuals? What are people looking for? So, 2022 comes along post pandemic, and like it becomes really hard to hire good people because like a lot of organizations are just popping out and they're saying, right, we just need to scale our people to handle the rest of the 2020s. And then we found a little bit later, 2023, last year, there's a lot of big contraction going on. A lot of organizations went, oops, my burn on people is way too strong because I did something silly last year. That means that a lot of roles have actually been quite challenged. People have lost their jobs. It's actually quite unfortunate. And then I see a lot of professionals in this field struggle to like find what's that next job going to be? Like, what can I find that's engaging? What are companies looking for? And this is where I sort of connect in with some information that again comes out of the Business Agility Institute. It's a collaboration with Scrum Alliance. And they went in and said, like, there are roles that we still seem to see like demand for. And they were particularly focusing on like the ways of working individuals like Scrum Masters or like a product owner. But if we step back a bit, I think we see the same trend come through. While there was still, and very much we see it inside of teams, if you've got a team that's just purely engineers, let's say, typically I find that they do a lot less well in terms of getting a product out because you've sort of like gotten a homogenous chunk of people that tend to think, just by role and by nature in sort of one way. The big differentiator for those teams is bringing somebody in that understands like that broader product part, that understands the big connection to the company. And then someone that's also very much focused on like a little bit of the time on how do we work together better? What's our ways of working? But what we found from this survey is it's not enough, right? Same thing for like the business analyst, project manager role. Like the capability that's being brought, the analytics that's being brought, the understanding of the work or the project that's being wrought is still really, really important. But companies are actually typically looking for two things. So kind of like we've heard in the past, this T-shaped individual that's got like a quite generalist skills like most of us have, but you got like one deep area of knowledge. This could be a BA, PM, working Scrum Master, product owner, whatever. The shift is actually there's an ask for like a pie-shaped person. So if you think of the simple mathematical pie, it's got two deep wells of knowledge. Those individuals still seem to be very much in demand. And I think that's the area to focus for a lot of us. What are these two like pie bits? It's like there's two capabilities that you're bringing in. So it's not like a jack of all trades. It's not what we're asking for. It's not the sort of signal we're getting. But it's like if you're really, really good at like ways of working, if you're really good at business analytics, what's the other thing that you're bringing in that helps wrap nicely around the work that you're being asked to do, right? Like, is there a bit of because there's a lot of push right now for generative AI, but there's a lot of data science behind that, like, do you have a data science statistics capability to bring a bit, certainly anyone that's got like a bit of engineering now, so long with one of these other way of working things finds themselves in more demand. But you could very much also be like someone that's in charge of a product but has really good knowledge of marketing or sales. So you can jump a little bit at those interfaces, which means a few less people are required, which sounds like a savings, but actually it also means there's a lot less handoffs in terms of the form and function of work that's going on. So an organization can be more efficient. It's a big ask, but it's definitely what a broad survey of like employers and employees was starting to find here is that the people that can clearly demonstrate two things have a much better fit and are a lot more attractive when the market gets a lot more contended.
I think that's vitally important. Have two skills and be able to go deep with them. We have one comment from Emal Barrielli. Hi, Emal. And he asks, hopefully you can help Martin him answer this question. The tendency to optimize locally is a major force that has to be countered on large scale transformations. What are some tactics that we can employ as project professionals to overcome this? Is this something
This
that
is
you feel you can answer?
Yeah, this is an excellent question, right? Because it's another way of talking about, as a smaller, like as a team or as a project that's been tasked to do something. Um, we very much focus on what we think our local outcomes are. Like what's the next thing I need to give down the line? What have we been asked to do? And this is where like these engagement front doors, but we see different variants of it really come into play. Is that people have said, right, I'm going to control the chaos externally as to how I work, but that's what causes this like lead time bump. It's slowed like more handoffs, which means it's a lot longer before we get critical feedback. Or if a project, like a hypothesis that we might have made in terms of delivery actually turns out not to be true, and then we have to have extended timelines or rework or whatever. So what tactics can we employ to try to we do want to be efficient in what we do, but we also want to be able to like sense and respond slightly more at that large scale. And I think this is where like having that sort of overlay, right? Like, what is the part of work that I'm doing? This is the team of teams. This is also like what the like a project or a program management office can bring to bear is they actually have that oversight of the parts that are working together. You're probably already thinking of interdependencies, but that knowledge can be hived away really, really easy. And this is like a human thing, right? Like I operate at this level, I see the funding, I see the workflow across multiple teams and multiple programs of work. You start to get in this place where you can assume that everyone has the same transparency, but that's potentially not true, or often not true.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely like a comms, a discussion point here where, what is the cadence at which we're going to bring the different teams together and just talk about how our overall delivery is going. And there's a big tendency to do this not frequently enough, right? Like in the worst case, it's like annual. So like I have only one opportunity to course correct per year. A lot of organizations do a quarterly business review style thing. So every quarter, there's a bit of a change. But I think, if you're doing something like sprints or whatever, like every 2 weeks, a month is a good time to like sense check of like, hey, we've been moving forward, with our parts, we're not, but like, what's the point in time when we just like reassemble and see how the individual elements are going on, right? It's that right balance of like not too frequently, but like let's not keep it annual or never. And then it helps to bring everyone together with like, hey, we can start talking. And this is where like your program management offices or like that team of team structure style leadership can start talking of like, this is what's going really, really well. And here is the retro feedback, that the elements that aren't going so well. What can we do to like course correct on that and improve its, collaboration, communication, whatever. Even just like a slight change in tact to like help optimize the overall flow of work while still keeping sanity in individuals. The context
Sanity.
keeps on mattering. Yeah.
Oh, of course. I like that. Keeping sanity. Thanks for the question, Emal, and thanks for the great answer, Martin. The big thing about Agile too is you keep hearing, oh, project managers, the title project manager or business analyst doesn't exist. So I guess the big next question is, how can organizations effectively manage the absence of these traditional roles like the BA or like the project manager?
I think my first big call out, because I hear this one a lot, right? Like we have no business analysts here, we have no project managers. But if you start looking around the workforce, you'll see that one of two things, very typically, that you'll have the roles will still exist, right? Like there'll be people walking around with positions or job titles that says like business analyst, blah, project manager, blah. And that's actually a lot easier to work with because there's an acknowledgement that that work has not gone yet, right? Other places will get a little bit craftier and like retitle, so it's a little bit harder to discover what's happening. So you've got to sort of like look into the system of work, like what are you actually asking this person to do, not what's sort of like the job title. But I think we typically find that for a bigger organization, there is like that coordinating function hasn't gone away. The nature of the work, the nature of the deliverables, the nature of the regulatory environment, something like that will mean that that work still exists, and we, instead of trying to hide behind it, or worse, lay a bunch of these roles off and then like slowly rehire them but more expensively, like let's just face into the fact that that work still exists, look into why it's still there, and that's the time to ask the question of like, is this actually required? It might very much be, so let's just acknowledge it and keep support for that function, right? No, it feels bad, I think, as an individual, to be told that your role doesn't exist, but you still have a job to keep on doing this thing that you trained for all your life, and please don't actually alter your behavior. So this becomes very much a challenge for leaders. If the system of work is telling people that they need business analytics style capabilities at the front, and it's like very much the traditional definition of that role, face into it and say, actually, is this all right here? It could very well be. It could have some interesting contractual arrangements or parts. Let's just accept that it's there, and then like, what is maybe, and it might be nothing, like what is the shift coming for these roles coming forward, in my different way of working, or just accepting that it's going to be a role that keeps on going. I think we're really just asking here for like, let's have some honesty in what we're asking people to do and the sort of roles that we need to respond to that. And I think we find there's still a lot of business analytics and or business analysis and project management going on inside a regular organization.
I think you're 100% correct. The work is always there. The regulations are always there. The requirements are always there. It doesn't matter what you call me. The work still has to get done, basically.
Yeah.
And it's all about context at the end of the day. Great. The theme of today's discussion was all about the benefits of Agile frameworks. And the last question I want to ask you is about the value of Agile frameworks. So what are the main benefits of implementing Agile frameworks? You've talked a bit about them, but I'm looking at something, say, for example, like SAFe. So what are the main benefits of implementing an Agile framework like SAFe in helping to scale and helping to improve that team performance?
So this is a sort of like the way I see this question is, I'm going from like this conceptual ask, right? Like handing work off between silos. The organization seems like that's actually a bit slow. We want to be more nimble. We want to react better. So that's like the high level concept. And this is usually where like, okay, how can I make my organization more agile? Great. But actually implementing this, right? Like getting the structures, the cross-functional teaming element in place, and then having like a way to map work around that to flow with it. That's where some of these frameworks really come in. So I'm quite personally framework agnostic, because the big challenge I'll have for an organization is like, if you don't know where to start, right, then picking just about anything is a great starting point, because at least then you're diving into this well of knowledge that's already been established in the world, like that has a lot of adopters around there. There's a lot to be said for picking something that has, like, I guess, market recognition. There's a lot of hate that's thrown around SAFe, sorry, like, but a lot of people understand the sort of sequencing and the agile release train element to it. So if you pick something like that, you don't know where to start, being able to pick a framework that exists and then using it, the key part for me is like, how do you then adapt it, right? If you stay pure to form as to what the framework tells you, that's probably going to become a little bit more challenging, because you'll have individuals saying, but the framework says. But the real value in these like frameworks is being able to say, well, for the nature of my industry, for the nature of my company, for the nature of what we are trying to achieve together, we're going to have to make a few changes here and there so that it works better for us. And that's the big challenge, right? Like, we're recognizing that a way of working, recognizing the way that we do work isn't suitable for purpose anymore, as kind of like the instigator for this, and being able to adapt the way that we work so that it suits us at this point in time, no matter the challenges sort of coming ahead. That's the big shift I think we're asking from these frameworks and people that adopt it. Don't say, I'm going to make myself more flexible, bring a bunch of changes in, and then stop that whole change process. The big objective here is being able to continuously reassess and continuously change at a sane cadence. the way that we do our work so that we can keep on being responsive, that we keep on being relevant to the market, so we can keep on selling and delivering that product that's ultimately paying our bills.
You've covered it really nicely. A lot of people are all about, oh, the framework says, and by the time you want to look at a framework, nothing gets done. So it's all about trying to adapt in the best way you can. Using that framework is kind of like a landmark, a starting point, and you can kind of modify it. I'm sure every organization is slightly different, so they can modify it for themselves. I don't know if there's a rule about it. I don't know, take 50%, the other 50% use on your own, or take 80%, this kind of thing. I'm sure it varies from organization to organization.
That's very much what I see on the ground. So I see a lot of organizations doing something that was like loosely modeled, like certainly modeled after SAFe to start off with, and you look like 2, 3, 4 years in, and like some of the terminologies and concepts, sometimes even role titles, are still very much like from that original idea. But it has been adapted for the way that the organization structured itself. It has changed as cross-functional teams have come in, but it's still very much like is able to answer that question of what are we trying to deliver together? How do we organize ourselves to do this? How do we organize ourselves to test whether what we're doing is actually meeting that original need?
Yeah, and I think I've looked at SAFe and I really think it's great because it includes so many things that business analysts do. Like obviously there's communication, there's a requirements analysis of some sort. There's obviously problem solving. There's an analytical mindset there too. So I think it's something people can certainly take a look at. Well, I want to say thanks very much, Martin. I know we talked a bit a few months back and tried to get today going. So I thank you for your time. And we've covered quite a lot of subjects under business agility, implementing business agility practices, business agility for high performers, the impact of this business agility on organizational structures and the performance. It's all about improving ways of working, and how having dual skills is very important, having those skills and going deep with them. And there is still a role for business analysts and project managers on different in different types of teams, different ways of working.
The nature of the work is changing, but
nature of the work
there's
changes.
still often, yeah.
It's still, but the roles are still there, even though the titles may be slightly different. And obviously, the value of Agile frameworks, I think, is certainly growing. So thanks very much, Martin, for your time. I want to just one more question. If anyone wants to get in touch with you out there, how can they do so?
LinkedIn's probably the best because it's the one I check the most. So, and it's got my email and contact details in it. I do have an ask for any listener. So, a lot of everything we've spoken about today, like this body of knowledge, really comes from people answering the business agility survey. There is a URL now, businessagilityreport.com, but I think we can also ship that around. The survey takes about 7 minutes to do. And the more we learn about your organization and your perspective, it really helps us flesh out, what's that broad knowledge base that we're seeing globally that we can then, aggregate the learnings of. And the benefit of answering the survey is that you get first access to the report before it's broadly publicly launched.
Okay, superb. I will post a link to that in this YouTube recording, and I'll also post, if I can, your LinkedIn profile URL as well.
Fantastic.
And so if anyone wants to get in touch with you, certainly about the business agility report, by all means, go ahead and do so.
Excellent. Thanks for setting this up, Marcus. Sorry for the heck with the streams,
That's
but
okay.
it's been fantastic.
It's all good. No, it's all good. I think it worked out really well. We put in 45 minutes, a lot of content to go through, but certainly a lot of value at the end of the day. So thanks once again, Martin. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Have a great one, Mark.
Take care. All right, you too. Bye.